Just a little bit of background about me. I was a journalist for 20 years, mostly on The Independent, which is ironic because they're probably the newspaper that's most anti-fracking around, although they don't really exist anymore. I've been involved in the energy debate for quite a long time, and I was on the board of NIREX, and I don't know if anybody here has heard of NIREX. NIREX was a body set up to deal with long-term nuclear waste, and the whole idea was we were going to dig two great big holes in the ground, I always point out to people, not one, in Cumbria and stick the waste down it, but for various reasons it never happened, and those reasons were to do with public perception, money, politics, but the irony was that the community in Cumbria desperately wanted us to do it, and that's something that I will come on to. I've been advising the onshore oil and gas industry for 4 years. I've also been involved in the area of risk communications. I don't know whether anybody here is involved in risk communications, which is about communicating things like pharmaceuticals, energy, increasingly in financial services, warning people about the negatives in a way that doesn't put them off, so that they're aware of the negatives, so they don't get put off. And I was fortunate enough to be invited to Harvard to lecture on this, and the feedback from that was very interesting, but it was a bit potty-mouthed, so I apologise if anything goes that way. I'm going to start off about natural gas, because what this industry produces is natural gas. And as a quick straw poll, how many people have gas central heating? Exactly. 84% of the population. 60% of the population cook with gas. Gas is in almost all of our household products. These glasses, your mobile phone, you name it, it's involved in it. A third of the UK's electricity is generated with gas. In the last few weeks, it's actually been 50%. The reason why coal is massively on the decline is largely due to natural gas. The UK has been very fortunate that we've had gas from the North Sea, but that's declining, and by 2020, over 70% of gas will be imported. And the problem with importing gas is that the majority doesn't come down a pipeline, comes in liquid naturalised gas, which is transported on great big ships. It's liquefied at source and then regasified. In that process, you lose between 5 and 10% of the gas. It is a very, very ecologically bad way of transporting gas. But the irony is, and this is where we come into the whole debate about what are facts, the way CO2 emissions are measured means that the negative emissions in the production of liquefied natural gas and gas outside the UK are not included in the UK's CO2. So if you purchase an LNG from abroad, it looks on our CO2 accounting as much more environmentally friendly. It's classic bad accounting. Now, what has happened in this debate? We have had a number of very valid concerns from people who are opposed to onshore natural gas fracking developments. One is climate concerns. There are people who want gas to be kept in the ground. Now, I would argue that that's a very foolish assumption, because if we're going to get to a greater use of renewables, we need some sort of bridging technology. If you wanted to move from your 84% of UK homes being heated by gas to renewables, you would need to get rid of nearly 20 million boilers in the UK, scrap 20 million boilers. Now, even on a natural cycle of scrappage and then replacement, that would take you probably about 30 years. Plus, at the moment, electricity costs about a third more to heat a house than gas. Now, at a time when we're worried about fuel poverty, it's very difficult to do that. The third thing is we don't have a grid to deliver the electricity, so you'd have to build a grid. And people like, I drive a hybrid car. I would like to drive an electric car. I know that it's a bloody stupid thing to buy an electric car at the moment, because electric car takes the equivalent of 2 days of my household electricity to charge every time I want to charge it. There is not the capacity in the UK to put the electricity in there. If you had 10 million electric cars on the road, you would have to double the capacity of the electric grid. All of these things they're all facts, and you guys work in the world of science. They're all facts, and you need to, and those things need to be communicated. And I think that what's really interesting is that people, for very good, genuine, honest reasons, want to keep fossil fuels in the ground. They want to reduce dependency on fossil fuels. They don't realise the pathway to it. The second area that opposes development is NIMBYism. And I'll come on to NIMBYism in a while, but pretty much anybody opposes any development anywhere near their place, their homes. So those come together to bring anti-fracking. But one extra element is bad science. And I apologise to Jason, I've used the term fake news, but I've qualified it with natural science. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these different claims, but these are all claims that are made about fracking in the UK. The first thing, the most important thing I would say to you is that there's only ever been one frack, or high volume hydraulic fracture in the UK. Now, there's been lots of what we might call fracking. There's a whole debate about what's defined as fracking. Because somebody said, oh, you've got to ban all fracking. And I said, well, go and tell Severn-Trent Water, because they're the biggest frackers in the UK, because they use fracking techniques to release underground water reservoirs in artesian wells, and they're the biggest owners of artesian water. So all of those things. But the actual high volume fracking is not taking place in the UK. So all the studies come from the US and to a small extent Australia. And fracking is a very, very trendy subject on US campuses. So there now exists over 1,000 academic studies, some of which are very good and have been peer reviewed, many of which disagree with each other. There is a joke that at Duke University there must be a room where the anti-frackers and the pro-frackers fight each other, because Duke has now produced about 6 different studies, 4 pro, 2 against. So we're winning the war at Duke. But you know, all of these studies. Now there's 2 very important points when you think about these studies. First off, Public Health England did a review of all the literature about 3.5 years ago. At the time, it said that the studies in other jurisdictions cannot be applied to the UK because of different regulation, different geology, different mineral rights, various different things. So according to Public Health England, none of these studies are actually applicable to the UK. More recently, a guy called Professor Mike Stevenson of the British Geological Survey, who is, and the British Geological Survey pretty much has to be independent, although, you know, there are, in the anti-fracking community, saying, well, it's funded by the government's pro-fracking, therefore it's not independent. Well, I really do think the British Geological Survey can be safely seen as independent. He wrote a book called Shale, Gas and Fracking, The Science Behind the Controversy, and he looked at 800 different studies. 800. I mean, it must have driven him mad. And he found that when you're going through all these stuff about low birth weights, cancer, contamination, drought, stuff like that, the only really negative stuff had happened in as an area of Pennsylvania, which was the earliest area that had been developed by the fracking industry in the US. And he said that that would indicate that that is due to poor technology used in the early days, poor well technology, not necessarily to do with the technique of fracking. But because he's a scientist, and because he's done a very, he wouldn't say anything that he cannot prove, he said that just indicates it. So he doesn't say that this is the exact truth. But that's basically what we've had where we've been studying the science. Now, what happens when you bring science to meet emotion? And we've talked about, you know, people getting information from their Aunt Susie, from their friends. I actually work also in the financial services industry. The really frightening thing in the financial services industry is that 80% of people get advice on their finances from their family, right? Rather than going to somebody who actually knows about finances, they go and find the information from somebody in their family. What the anti-fracking community has done very well has been to harness emotions. So these people up here, these are the nanas. Don't know if anybody's heard of the nanas. The nanas are a bunch of people started in Lancashire, which are mothers and grandmothers. And they basically say, because we're mothers and grandmothers, you've got to trust us because we care about our children, we care about what happens to our children, which is a very, very valid argument. But the point is that they use techniques like cooking cupcakes. Now, remember that over 60% of the country cooks with gas. So we've got to pretty expect that a lot of those cupcakes are being cooked with gas. They use these emotional arguments to come across. But what happens is they go fast and loose with the facts. So we come to Sherwood Forest. Now, is anybody here from Nottinghamshire? Well, anybody who's from Nottinghamshire will know that Sherwood Forest is not exactly what it used to be. Certainly in the days of Robin Hood, as I will bore for England, the reason why Sherwood Forest went all the way from Derbyshire right up into Yorkshire, and being from Yorkshire, Robin Hood was almost certainly from Yorkshire, and the reason why he thought the Sheriff of Nottingham was Nottingham was the administrative area that was in charge of that. A company called INEOS wanted to do seismic surveys in Sherwood Forest. Now, you do seismic surveys so you can check the geology around where you are likely to drill or frack. And the reason why you do seismic surveys is because a few years ago at a place called Priest Hall, well, you do it anyway because it's good practice, but a few years ago at a place called Priest Hall near Blackpool, Quadrilla fracked. It hadn't done proper seismic surveys, and it hit a fault. And because it hit a fault, they got what people describe as an earthquake. Now, the maximum on the Richter scale that they registered was 2.6. Now, if any geologists or people who know about the Richter scale around here, you will testify that 2.6 ain't particularly high in the Richter scale.
It's not Jamie Vardy at a 2.6 scoring goal at Leicester City.
Yeah, exactly. Jamie Vardy, 2.6. The so-called earthquake in Kent a couple of years ago, which had fantastic stuff on social media with bins falling over people with the caption, "We shall rebuild," was 4.3. So it wasn't a particularly big earthquake, but it got people a lot scared. It led to a moratorium on fracking, and Quadrilla had not done its surveys properly. INEOS wants to do the surveys in an area which has includes the historical boundaries of Sherwood Forest. not the current boundaries of Sherwood Forest, which is a protected woodland, right? So all the antis got up and said, got to stop in Sherwood Forest, got to stop in Sherwood Forest. A lot of people in Nottinghamshire have pointed out that the M1 goes through the old boundaries of Sherwood Forest. There are massive distribution centres and a shopping centre in there. So what they considered to be Sherwood Forest was not Sherwood Forest, but that has not stopped this campaign. And I read a letter from last Friday in the Yorkshire Post by a guy from John Appleyard from Liversedge, which is in Bradford, my hometown. If you've ever been to Liversedge, it's lovely moorlands there, and Liversedge, it's shit, horrid. But it's a bit like being stuck in something really horrid and looking at something really beautiful and going, oh, I wish I could be there. John Appleyard goes, in a matter of weeks, Sherwood Forest, Britain's most famous woodland, could be at risk. If this goes ahead, Sherwood Forest could be filled with spluttering lorries, heavy machinery and explosives by next month. Do you know what they do with a 3D seismic survey? They drill a small hole, way down, very, very deep hole. So you need something a bit like that camera, slightly taller, and it drills right down. And then you drop a little camera, a sensor like that, down it. And then you measure it for a few days. That's what you do. You don't have a load of spluttering lorries. Somebody can take it in the back of their car and drop it down. So that's the sort of emotional arguments that are being used. Now, what is the effect of that? You go to the media. The media can be, and apologies, the BBC has been very, very good at it on this. They've also been very, very bad. I hate to say this, I had a BBC correspondent, and I spoke to this BBC correspondent. I said, would you like a briefing about fracking, because you have been writing about it? And she said to me, no, I know enough already, which was very, very depressing. The media loves, it's slightly gone a bit now, but fracking was catnip to them. It was clickbait. So they would stick fracking in any story. This is a selection of national media. We've had some corkers. We've had Vivienne Westwood, the fashion designer, interviewed by the science editor of National Newspaper on fracking. We were thinking of offering our chief executive to review the Milan fashions as a retort. We've had a lot of stuff in local papers where the local paper will write fracking threat to Shropshire. Frack-free Shropshire says we will fight fracking. And we phone them up and go, have you looked at the British Geological Survey map of where the shale gas resources in the UK? No. Well, have a look at that, and you'll see there's no gas underneath Shropshire, so therefore no one's going to drill on it. My wife got an email from a company, an organisation called 38 Degrees, I'm sure most of you have heard of 38 Degrees, saying, donate to us, we must stop fracking in Islington. She showed this to me, and I said, even if we could get planning permission on Islington, if you drill down to underneath London, all you get is water. There ain't no gas there. No one's gonna frack in Islington. This leads to public misunderstanding. Now, the interesting thing about this is you can look at this study in a lot of ways about total support, those who oppose, those who are anti. But the biggest conclusion you get is that people don't know much about it. So the majority of people do not know much about fracking. And to be honest, they don't really care. Even in local areas where they're likely to operate, the anti-fracking movement does not get a lot of interest. And what I sort of feel in this area is that There's a lot of noise and a lot of heat, but there's not really a lot of actually informed debate underneath. And actually, people genuinely don't care. That's not to stop it becoming a political football. The Lib Dems are very anti-fracking. Jeremy Corbyn's anti-fracking. He's my MP. He's pretty much against everything. So there's a lot of. The interesting thing about the Lib Dems is they're anti-fracking, but when they were in power, it was their energy secretary who green-lighted fracking. The Labour Party's anti-fracking. Their second biggest funder is the GMB, which is pro-fracking. If you look at how much the GMB has donated to this Labour campaign, you will notice that it has dropped from something like about 3 million for the 2015 campaign to about 150,000 this time. So I suspect the Labour Party, once Corbyn moves out, will move pro-fracking. The thing is that this debate is not, it has happened so many other times. So we've had it with onshore wind, we've had it with pylons, we've had it with nuclear, we've had it with solar, we had it HS2, GM crops, or these sort of arguments continue again and again, and they're often quite contradictory. So you get people who are opposed to one thing and are pro something else, but they need, so for instance, pylons. If you want renewables, you've got to have pylons. You can't get the electricity ain't going to get from where you've got the wind farm to anywhere sensible unless you build the pylons. So if you're pro wind farms, you should be pro pylons, but people aren't pro wind farms and pro pylons. They don't think the argument through. So where do we think it's going to go? Now, I was talking to somebody earlier about GM crops, which is something that here you've done a lot of studies on. GM crops is a very interesting debate. The one that I think is the most interesting debate is nuclear. So when I was at university, we all were anti-nuclear. Nuclear was bad. We had to stop it. You used to have those German things which said nuclear 9 Danke, and you used to wear those all around. Nowadays, you don't get much opposition to nuclear because we're very much used to it. It's gone through a bit like the Kubler-Ross 6 stages of grief, nuclear. You've gone through rejection to indifference to acceptance, and now you're getting advocacy. So both the Labour and Lib Dem manifestos are pro-nuclear. If you go and survey people where nuclear plants are, they're very pro-nuclear. In the funny thing, and a very unreported thing, was that a few years ago, when they decided to decommission the Dungeness power station down in Kent, which has to be decommissioned because the nuclear power station has sunk in the last few years, so they can't get the water in to cool it. Thousands of people did a petition to British Energy saying, "Why are you taking away our nuclear power station? How dare you?" The support for Hinkley around its area is very high. So we've had this situation go through nuclear, GMOs, foam mass, MMR. We've seen the science be disproven, and people have come round. So will this happen with fracking? Well, these are the facts that we're trying to get over. That fracking has been going for over 40 years. It's used by water companies in a certain extent. It's used here. I don't know if you can see this picture. It's Witch Farm. And Witch Farm is Western Europe's largest oil and gas field. Witch Farm is in Dorset. It is segued between an RSPB reserve and an area of outstanding natural beauty. And if you see, there's Witch Farm, and you see that. Do you know what that is? Sandbanks. Sandbanks is one of the most desirable places to live in Britain, with homes going at £5 million each. That's people who, which farm's been going for about 25 years, people get comfortable living with these things, and they realise that these things can operate safely, and they become part of the community. And that's why I think that fracking is going to become a reality. What I should do, I'm paid to hopefully get these sort of things through. But Third Energy, who we work for, got their approval in North Yorkshire last year and are going to start fracking this year. Quadrilla got theirs green lighted on approval. They've started production. They started building their site, and they will probably frack this year. A couple of recent approvals in Nottinghamshire. A whole load of applications on the way. So what have we learnt from this? It's a very, very difficult area. I haven't got into the issue of social media because personally we found that social media has become a zero-sum game. There are so many people who are anti on social media that every time you post on social media you get it back 20, 30 times. And what happens is they end up basically conversing with themselves. But in the influential media, or with people who are influencers, we don't let a false assertion stand. We immediately get onto it, and that's very important. But the other important areas is finding your friends and supporters, making sure that people are well informed, and this very much includes scientists. And scientists have a very important role to play. But as I said before, going back to Professor Mike Stevenson, scientists never usually say, yes! They go, on the balance of probability, maybe. Now, unfortunately, in this debate, when you've got a lot of antis going, no, 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 somebody's saying, on the balance of probability, maybe, possibly, yes, you know, doesn't quite work for you. So trying to get people to be more positive in that debate has been difficult for us, but we understand why people not. But evidence-based. Our clients are engineers, they're geologists, they're chemists. They do not do anything unless they have evidence-based arguments, and therefore we don't do anything unless we have evidence-based arguments. So we've had to fight and fight and fight and fight. We believe we're winning. It's been a long haul. We don't make ourselves particularly popular, particularly in the political world. We take the brickbats, but we understand that, going back to the slide right at the beginning, that we need the gas, so therefore we want to go forward with it. And I hope I've persuaded you. At least you understand what we're doing. Thank you.